Welcome to the G
and H
podcast, where we are going to be talking about more tech and more tech. I'm your host, Landon.
I'm your host, Logan.
Today we'll be discussing RAM, and no, we're not talking about the truck, we're talking about random access memory. On today's podcast episode, Don't Get Your RAM in a Knot, Understanding Computer Memory. This is one component part that you cannot live without.
What is RAM? Well, RAM stands for Random Access Memory. That is one of the most fundamental parts of a computer. RAM is a sort of like a temporary memory bank where your computer stores data it needs to receive quickly. For example, like Chrome tabs on a computer, the ones that get opened now. If you want to think of an example of RAM, you can think of it as like a sticky note. You can use it whenever, and then when you're done with it, you can toss it away, like when you turn your computer off. The concept of random access memory refers to the ability to directly access any piece of data within a storage device. Who invented RAM? Dynamic Random Access Memory, RAM, was first invented in 1968 by Robert Denard, who was born in Texas and is an engineer who created one of the first models of RAM, which is called Dynamic Random Access Memory.
All right, let's get straight into how RAM works. So we're going to be describing the physical components of RAM, like memory chips. So let's start off with the circuit board. The circuit board is where all of the main components of RAM are, soldered on, and they're connected in an integral circuit. This ensures that they can effectively communicate with each other and your CPU. Then you have the mode registers, a chip that controls basic device operations such as the burst, the length type, and the CAS latency. So the burst length is the number of data items to be transferred. Burst length affects the efficiency of the controller. For example, a burst length of 8 will provide more data transfer cycles than a burst length of 4. CAS latency is column addresses, strobes, or signals. It's how much clock cycles it takes for the DRAM to output data called for by the CPU. Then you have memory banks. This stores the onboard memory modules, with most modern RAM modules having at least 2 and sometimes 4. Then you have the SPD chip. It stores information about the RAM size, its speed, its type, and its access time. Then you have the contact pins. This is actually what the DRAM or the RAM module will actually connect into the motherboard with, to allow it to communicate with all of your other hardware. And then, of course, you have your heat spreader, which is going to keep that RAM nice and super cool to make sure that you do not lose performance while you are gaming or doing any kind of performant-heavy task. We're going to now explain how it's actually stored inside of RAM. So data in RAM is stored using a combination of capacitors and transistors. Each memory cell in DRAM, or dynamic RAM, the most common type of RAM, consists of capacitors that hold a charge representing a bit of data, and a transistor that acts as a switch to read or write the data. When the capacitor is charged, it represents a 1. When it is discharged, it represents a 0. This is called binary, the language of the computers. However, because capacitors leak charge over time like an uncapped hose, DRAM requires periodical refreshing to maintain the data.
Why RAM matters? The impact of RAM on computer's performance impacts the speed of overall anything you're going to do on a computer. It helps out the CPU in immense ways by reducing the heavy load on top of the CPU by taking some of the tasks for a short period of time and then letting the CPU handle it later. When your computer has more RAM, it can run programs much faster than before, even if just one program. This means if you're doing a video editing while also running multiple functions on your CPU in the background, you'll be able to handle these a lot faster. Generally, faster the RAM, the faster the processing speed. Able to take tasks on a lot faster and increase the speed of your CPU, or not increase the speed of the CPU, but help the speed of the CPU, meaning that overall processes run a lot faster.
Choosing the right RAM. Explaining factors to consider when buying RAM is really important. So the capacity of RAM is usually done in gigabytes. Sometimes it could be megabytes. Sometimes it could even be kilobytes. Now, this is really small. This is stuff that you're really not going to be looking at nowadays. So really 8 gigabytes of RAM is for a casual computer usage like internet browsing, maybe even, going on to Google Chrome, maybe even watching YouTube. 16 gigabytes is for like spreadsheets and other office programs. Even people use 16 gigabytes for gaming. Most consoles have 16 gigabytes of RAM. And you're going to see 16 gigs a lot inside of school systems like teachers. All of our teachers and all of our all of our administration are using 16 gigabytes of RAM on their computers. And at least 32 gigabytes is for gamers and multimedia creators. Now, this is with, your your computers that you're going to be using for gaming, like mine at home. I use at least 32 gigabytes. Logan, he uses 64?
No, 32.
32. And then you have the speed. You have your megahertz. This is what the RAM is actually clocked at. This is how fast it is moving. And we talked about this in how RAM works. So DDR2 is 800 megahertz. DDR3 is 1333 megahertz, or it could be 1600 megahertz. DDR4 is 2666 megahertz, or it could be 3200 megahertz. And then DDR5, 4800 megahertz, or 5200 or 5600. This all depends on whether you have overclocked your memory or not. And this is more of a higher skill that you will learn as you delve deeper into these sides of components. So you have different types of RAM. So you have your SODIMMs, which are typically used inside of laptops, smaller PCs, or home theater setups. These are really small RAMs. You also have DIMM, which is the most common form factor. This is primarily used in desktop computers and PCs, like the ones that we're talking about right now. RAM comes in all different kinds of DDRs, and they all scale almost like iPhones or Android phones. The higher the number, the more speed, and the newer and more expensive it gets. Now, the compatibility with motherboard is with your motherboard is really important, and we'll be getting into this our next episode. Every DDR is different and has a different size of sticks and different slots. You will find out that your DDR sometimes won't even fit in your motherboard because you're going to have to look on your manufacturer's website to actually see what your motherboard supports. Some motherboards don't support DDR1, some don't support DDR3, some of them do support DDR5 and 4. It just depends on what type of motherboard you have. They can also support different kinds of amounts of RAM. So they can support 32 gigabytes or 16 or 128. But if you go over that amount, then your computer's just not going to recognize that. RAM also comes in configurations that you can set on your motherboard. They come in single, which is where you only use one module, which is in one slot, or you can have dual channel, which is where you use two modules. And a dual channel is always going to be better than a single slot of RAM. Even if you have less RAM, it will always be faster. Now, quad is where you use 4 modules, and octo is where you're using 8 modules. Now, you're not going to see octo usually in normal computers like here at a school or even at your house. You're going to see that in more of a server or maybe in cloud storage. So, tips that you might need to find RAM. Now, you want to consider factors of your usage. If you're a casual browser or you're a heavy gamer, okay? The required capacity of gigabytes is really subjective if you are just browsing the web. But now you have to think with Windows 11 coming out and all that, sometimes you just have to switch up to that higher gigabytes of RAM. You also have to think about your RAM speed, your CAS latency, because lower is always better with your CAS latency. And you also have to check your compatibility with your motherboard, or whether you need to go with single or dual channel configuration.
Now, in the world of RAM, there's a lot of misconceptions and myth about what's better and what's not. One of the main ones is more RAM is always better, some say. Not entirely true. In fact, sometimes getting like 128 gigs of RAM is just a waste of money. You're never going to use all that RAM. You're never going to need all that unless you're using a quantum computer or something like that.
Exactly.
RAM is another one they use. Is RAM is only important for gamers. It's also not true. That's why a lot of administration in our school use 16 gigs of RAM, because that can help with tasks such as internet browsers and cameras you may have open, and just different apps for grading and things like that can also help. Another thing is you can never have too much RAM. That's also not true. That goes back to more RAM is better, where the speed and capacity of the memory can significantly impact your computer startup speed. Nevertheless, adding more RAM will only help up to a certain point, to the point where you need to actually use the RAM, and then above that where it's just wasting money. Finally, the most important one, can't I download RAM online?
This is a funny one. I just left this up to interpretation for Logan.
No, you can't. No, you can't. If you think you can download RAM, I was, I know what they're sending you.
You cannot download RAM online. That is a virus. Please stay away from that. All right, let's get into upgrading your RAM. So we're going to discuss the process of upgrading your RAM in your computer, how you actually do it. So the first thing that you're actually going to want to do is you're going to want to gather your supplies and clean off your installation space and make sure you're working in a static safe environment. Now, what do I mean by that? A static safe environment is a space where no static electricity can touch the computer. The reason why you want to do this is because if you were to shock your computer with static electricity, you might actually fry one of your components. They're very delicate parts, and if you fry one, you might be up to $100 in debt, $300 in debt. You might have to buy an entirely new set of RAM or an entire new graphics card or CPU. It just depends. So please, take off your fuzzy stocks, take off all of your, your cotton and that are made out of, all this linen and stuff, and just put on an ESD strap. Please protect yourself from static electricity. Now, as well, please shut down your computer before you try to uninstall or uninstall your RAM. Please shut it off. If you do not shut it off, it will not work, and then you will try looking on Reddit for a solution of how to fix it. Please. Then unplug the power cable and then hold the power button for 5 seconds. This will then clear the entire computer, all of its capacitors, which hold an electrical charge of energy. Then open the case. Ground yourself, like I said, on that ESD strap. Connect that ESD strap to the case. Do not connect it to the power supply and turn it on because you will blow a hole in your wrist. Now, then remove the existing memory modules, which will be some green sticks right to the right of the CPU. And we will be talking about the CPU in a later episode. Then install your memory. You should push down on both sides until you hear a click. Now, don't take a hammer and start hammering down on the memory. That's not going to help. That's just going to break it. All right. Then after that, remove your ESD strap, close up the computer, plug everything back in, reap the rewards. And maybe even overclock the RAM if you're feeling dangerous. Now, I'm going to go too far into that because you might actually blow up your RAM. But, if you feel like doing it, YouTube is a great tool and it's everywhere for you. So I'm now going to mention the benefits of and the challenges of upgrading your RAM. So, one, you're going to get more performance, all right, if you actually needed the RAM. If you didn't need the RAM, you're not going to see that much of importance. Sometimes RAM isn't seated properly, and it might beep like a bomb, okay? If you hear beep, beep, beep coming from your computer, you probably didn't seat your RAM right, and you might want to open it back up and try to seat it properly. You might also have the wrong RAM type. If you have the wrong RAM type, please do not try to shove the RAM in with a hammer. Please, I cannot state this enough. There are countless posts on Reddit and YouTube everywhere where people have hammered RAM into the DIMM slot. Please don't do that. You will ruin
your money. Go ahead and do it.
You will ruin your motherboard, please.
So just to touch base here, just to go back what we talked about. We talked about how RAM is it's an important component of your computer, and not only just computer, but tech in general. RAM can be upgraded, and more RAM can improve performance, but always the right amount, never too much. RAM is something you can't just download off the internet, unless you just want to. Go ahead. And upgrading RAM is not hard. Most people can do it.
So, we hope that you all enjoyed. I hope that you stay tuned for our next episode of the G&H Technology Podcast, where we'll be talking about all types of secondary storage, the computer part that is going to store all of your data permanently. Well, we hope you enjoyed, and this is G
and H
signing off. We hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.